Howdy folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of welcoming back Mr. Michael Rivero. And Michael Rivero worked on the Viking and Voyager missions for NASA and is in fact a rocket scientist. He has also worked in Hollywood in special effects and currently operates a special effects company with his composer wife in Hawaii, where he also operates the highly successful What Really Happened news website, which you can find at whatreallyhappened.com, and is the host of a talk radio show Monday through Friday that can be found on the GCN network. And welcome back, Mr. Rivero, to the Daily Coin.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here, and with everything that's going on, as I was explaining just before we got started, I've got three unrelated questions that should hit some of the high points of where we're at right now in our world. And I want to start with Paris. And there's lots of speculation about this being a false flag, and others say it's merely an act of terrorism. And what's your take, and why do you believe what you believe about what's going on over there?
Well, I don't believe, I conclude, and I try and avoid belief because it does cloud up critical analytical thinking.
Okay.
But you need to go back and understand that false flag attacks are a very common feature of history. School doesn't teach you about them because governments still find them useful and they don't want you wise to what's going on. But if you go back, we've got an article at whatreallyhappened.com on 42 false flags that have been officially admitted to, where a government played a dirty trick on their own people to motivate them into usually a war of conquest. And so it isn't shocking to say that government is using a false flag attack. It's actually business as usual. It's what they always do. Now, in terms of acts of terror, there's a very valid piece of logic why you might think that pretty much all acts of terror are, in fact, false flags. If you go back to the history of the United States of America, when we were trying to break free from Great Britain, would it have made sense for Thomas Jefferson and George Washington to go into colonial schools and start killing school children? It wouldn't, because when you're a group that is trying to bring about socio-political change, you need the support of the general public. You don't go out and do something so horrific and shocking that you destroy your own public support. When something like that happens, it's being done by another party to put the blame on you as part of a justification. Probably the world's most famous false flag attack was carried out by Adolf Hitler, who sent his own people to attack the German radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany. And they were all dressed up as Polish nationals. They even took along a Polish prisoner and shot him dead on the spot so the body could be found. And the next day, Hitler goes on German radio, says, "We were attacked by Poland. We have to counterattack before they can mount a larger war against us." And Germany invaded Poland on the basis of that hoax. And of course, the world was led into World War II. Another good example of a false flag attack would be the USS, the Lusitania.
Yes.
That was used to propel the United States into World War I. Now, we've all been told in school, oh, the Lusitania was an innocent passenger liner. It was just destroyed cruelly by the Nazis. The reality is very different. Even before the United States officially entered World War I, they were smuggling military supplies to Great Britain on these ships, like the Lusitania. And in this particular case, the German government knew what was going on, and the German government actually took out ads in all of the New York newspapers warning people, do not sail on the Lusitania. It is carrying weapons of war. It will be fired on as a legitimate target.
Wow.
And I have copies of those ads, at my website. And the Lusitania was sent into an area where they knew there were all kinds of U-boats. It had no military escort, and the captain was ordered to proceed at a moderate pace. They set that up to be destroyed in order to be able to wave the bloody shirt to anger Americans into World War I. The number of hoaxes is amazing. The Spanish mine at Havana Harbor that blew up the USS Maine never existed. The torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin that got us into Vietnam didn't exist. Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt spent all of 1941 goading the Japanese to an attack on Pearl Harbor following an 8-step plan created by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. And that's how these things get started. Nobody wants to go to war. And when a leader wants to get his people into war, he has to find some way to convince them it's their only choice. And we've seen all kinds of lies. Saddam's nuclear weapons. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
Big, huge lie. And this is more of the same. Now, not too long ago, Judicial Watch acquired a declassified U.S. government document that confirmed the U.S. government actually created and funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda to be covert tools to redraw the map of the Middle East. And that's why the United States has been bombing Syria for the last year and never hitting ISIS. What they're doing is waging war on Syria itself to get Bashar al-Assad out of power. Russia comes in, and in 1 month, they've inflicted far more damage on ISIS, the real ISIS, than the U.S. did in an entire year. And now the U.S. is trying to find some way where they can go back in and take control of the situation in Syria. And that was a big part of what happened with this attack in Paris. And as soon as the attack was over, we're going back into Syria, we're going to get ISIS. But you know, all the named suspects in the Paris attacks have European Union passports. The only Syrian passports that were found next to the dead bodies turned out to be fakes. Well, if we don't actually know who did the attack in Paris, and by the way, witnesses said these were clean-shaven white guys driving a brand new Mercedes-Benz. If we don't know who did it, why the big rush to get back into Syria and Iraq? And that alone tells us this incident is being used to try and revive the U.S. failed war agenda.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, as far as if it's not a false flag, if it's just some random act, why didn't the GCHQ or the NSA or the DHS or any of the other alphabet soup or any of the spy satellites, why didn't they pick up any of the 6 different groups of people that had a coordinated attack that all were launched within 33 minutes of one another? Why weren't they able to pick it all up? I mean, isn't their job to keep us safe and to keep us protected from this kind of thing happening?
Well, that's what they say their job is, and obviously this has been a grand epic failure if it wasn't really a false flag that was supposed to happen. But these people who carried out the attacks had major logistical support on the scale of a nation state, including the fact that the computer systems of the French security services were hacked and jammed starting 48 hours before the actual terror attack and completely paralyzed. And it was a very sophisticated cyber attack, not just a denial of service attack, but something that actually exploited weaknesses within the structure of their computer networks. And that is not something you're going to see ISIS in a cave somewhere in the Syrian desert pulling off with a laptop. This smacks of a nation state. These actors in this situation had military-grade weapons.
Right.
And again, the witnesses were saying they had military bearing. These were trained professional shooters who did this. And you need to look at something else that was going on. The media is applauding the very good piece of luck that they had, that there just happened to be a terrorist security drill involving a multi-site terror attack going on at the exact same time the real attack happened. How lucky we were. That's why everybody was able to respond so quickly. Well, this is nonsense, because all of these other false flag terror attacks, there's also a convenient security drill going on at the same time. There was one going on in New York on 9/11. That's why FEMA was on the ground near the World Trade Center the night before it actually happened.
Yep.
And there was a security drill involving multiple hijacked planes hitting multiple buildings. The same thing with the subway bombing in London on 7/7,
Yep.
where there just happened to be a security drill simulating a London subway bombing attack at the same time the real one actually happened. And there's a rather interesting wrinkle that came out of the London subway bombing, because it came out that just before that all happened, there had been somebody going around the local Muslim community hiring actors to assist in the security drill. And one of the bombers was, this Muslim guy with a brand new baby, not exactly your suicidal, fanatical, religious type. And these people were apparently hiring Muslims to play bad old terrorists for the security drill. And they were probably handed what they were told was a fake bomb and said, if you can get this bomb onto the subway car, we will give you, a couple of £100. And then, of course, the bombs are set off by remote control, and you've managed to manufacture a suicide bomber.
Yep. I remember all of that all too well. And it's terrifying to think that our governments will do these things to us and then portray it as something that it's not, and in order to sell their agenda. And speaking of which, what is the agenda here? I mean, other than bombing Syria and taking over Syria for whatever reason that they have, I mean, what's going on? What's the program behind it? What's the driving force?
Well, Syria is just one part of a much larger agenda. And General Wesley Clark actually blew the whistle on this back in 2003 and revealed that the U.S. government had launched on an agenda to conquer the resource-rich regions of the Middle East and bring them under U.S. control through puppet rulers. Yeah. And the reason for that actually goes all the way back to the end of World War II in an agreement called Bretton Woods. Now, at the end of World War II, Great Britain surrendered the pound sterling's role as the accepted global trade and banking currency. This was the bargain that Roosevelt made with Churchill to bring the United States into the war against the Nazis. Britain's pound sterling would surrender its position as the global trade and banking currency and allow the U.S. dollar to take over. So as the war wound down, all of the major financial powers met at this luxury resort in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, and they hammered out the Bretton Woods Agreement that made the U.S. dollar the unquestioned accepted global currency. Now, back at the end of World War II, when accounts were still being settled, if not with bullion, with actual boxes of paper notes, having a single global currency actually made a great deal of sense. These days, in an age of global instantaneous electronic financial transactions, it's an obsolete idea. But from the end of World War II to now, the United States financial system made a huge profit off of the fact that everybody had to first get U.S. dollars before they could bank and trade across borders anywhere else in the world. And they got those dollars either by borrowing them at interest from the Federal Reserve or by bringing manufactured goods and agricultural produce, things of real value, to the United States in exchange for these pieces of paper with ink all over them. Now, these other nations went along with this deal on two conditions. The first was that the U.S. not overprint paper dollars in order to loot other nations of manufactured goods and agricultural produce for the cost of ink and paper. And the second requirement was that the U.S. dollar was always going to be redeemable for gold at $34 an ounce. And everybody signed off on it. But the Federal Reserve isn't actually a part of the federal government. They don't answer to the federal government. And so the Federal Reserve began overprinting the dollars. And it was part of the reason the post-year economy in the U.S. was so good. We were having all these imported products and food and things coming on in for ink and paper. Then in 1970s, France was looking at this huge stack of ink and paper piling up in the vaults. And they notified the U.S. government that they were going to redeem those paper notes at the agreed-on price, $34 per ounce of gold. Richard Nixon took a look inside Fort Knox, realized they didn't have anywhere near enough gold to redeem all that ink and paper, and he ended gold convertibility, which technically ended Bretton Woods. But the U.S. financial system still needed the world to be coming to the U.S. for paper dollars, and so they embarked on what was called the petrodollar deal. And that's where the U.S. government went to all of the oil-producing regions of the Middle East, and they said, we'll make you a deal. If you will sell your oil only for U.S. dollars, and you will invest those dollars back in the U.S. economy, we will guarantee your military safety. And so the world still had to come to the United States and borrow or trade for U.S. dollars to get their oil supplies met. And that deal kept on working up until just after 9/11, when Israel's arrogance really went on full display, and it started to become obvious to the other nations in the Middle East that the United States could not actually keep their promise to militarily protect the other nations from Israel's aggressions. And at that point, some of these nations started saying, well, the petrodollar deal is over. We're going to start trading our oil for currencies that serve our interests. So in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro.
Yep.
Bush and Tony Blair had a quick meeting down in Crawford, Texas, and 1 year later, screaming nuclear weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. invades Iraq, kills Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil was put back on the world market, but only for the United States dollar. Then over in Libya, you had Muammar Gaddafi, who'd done a fabulous job of improving the standard of living in Libya. Huge waterworks. It was a model for the rest of Africa. All of a sudden, he closes down Libya's privately owned central bank. He establishes a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar. Then he announces to the rest of the world that Libya's oil is for sale, but only for the gold dinar. They go into Libya, claim it's a revolution. They kill Gaddafi. Libya's oil is put back on the market only for the U.S. dollar. The state central bank is shut down and a new private central bank installed, and nobody knows where the gold for the gold dinar vanished to. And this is really what's driving all of these wars of conquest. The U.S. has to be in control of all the resource-rich areas of the world in order to force them to trade those resources only for the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. financial system has gotten very lazy over the Bretton Woods petrodollar deal. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline both in quantity and quality, and because of the disastrous experiment with GMO, nobody wants to buy our agricultural produce. If the world turns away from using the dollar for global trade and banking, and it's already starting to happen,
Yes.
The U.S. economy is going to implode.
How do you see, and I want to move on, but I do want to pursue this just for a second longer. As far as the petrodollar, I've started calling it the war dollar because that's what it is. I mean, it's an instrument of death. It's backed by war. It's not backed by petroleum anymore. It's backed by war and nothing more, in my opinion. And with the financial infrastructure that both China and Russia have built over the past 2 to 3 years, well, that they've finally gotten online in the last 2 to 3 years, doesn't that mean that the U.S. and the Western world as a whole are soon to be completely separated from the Eastern world and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, the BRICS Consortium, and the Silk Road, all of that? It seems like all of that is going to be on one system, and the West is going to be on another system. Or how is that going to pan out? Or is that what we're seeing in Syria right now as far as the war to make sure that the Chinese and Russians don't, in fact, go down that path?
Well, the Chinese and Russians have already gone down that path. And what's really going on here is, up until this stuff all started, the U.S. still had a monopoly not only in the global currency, but in the global electronic transaction system, the SWIFT system.
Exactly.
And they were politicizing and weaponizing both the dollar and SWIFT, and the response of these other countries is, we'll just set up our own system.
Right.
It's a parallel system. And so the U.S. monopoly on global trade and banking has already been broken. And so what is really behind all of this warmongering is a war between the U.S. paper Federal Reserve note, the Russian ruble, and the Chinese yuan. And that's what's ultimately driving all of it. And the insanity of this, they're willing to risk nuclear incineration of the surface of the planet Earth in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to be using.
I don't mean to laugh, but it's just so insane.
It
Michael.
Absolutely is. Now, if you go over to my website and you look up at the little submenu near the top, you're going to see an article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars.
Yep.
And it's actually been made into videos by some of the fans out there, but the original article goes into a lot more detail, and it tells the history of the United States of America from the point of view of this ongoing conflict between private central bankers and states that provide their own currency debt-free. And I've had so many people who've read this article, and they write me and say, for the first time, U.S. history now makes sense, and they understand what has really been driving the history is the greed of these private central bankers who've managed to hold the world in debt slavery for 300 years, And now we're all beginning to understand that's what it's all about. These private central banks do not serve the nation. They do not serve the people. They serve themselves. They are systems of enslavement by debt obligation.
Exactly.
It's rule by compound interest, and it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as people believe this is the way the world is supposed to be.
Right. And for those that are not familiar with it, you really do need to go and read that article, watch the video as well, because there's some people that have done a really good job of putting it to video. But like Michael was saying, his written article goes into a lot more detail. So you've got all wars are bankers' wars, and you also have Bill Still's The Money Masters. You should watch that as well.
That's also a very good one, yes.
Very good. And then to tie everything together, to put it into what's happening right now, Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money. He takes and breaks it down as well. So between those three right there, you should have a very, very good picture of what's actually happening and what drives everything that you and I are sitting here discussing, Michael. I mean, it's all right there. I mean, but I could go on for hours on this, but I really
let me put it in a different perspective here.
Okay.
First of all, you need to realize that prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we're on the edge of big mistake number 3. And it's not merely a timing coincidence. When you have a privately owned bank that is issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, the debt is always going to grow faster than the available money supply. And what's going to happen is the people are going to have to borrow money to do their businesses, to buy homes and cars and everything, until they reach a point where they stop borrowing because they're barely able to maintain the debt payments.
But because where we're at.
No, we've gone past that point. Okay. At that point, the Keynesians come in and say, well, the government has to borrow on behalf of the people to keep this little pyramid scheme going. And so the government will start borrowing and borrowing on behalf of the people and without their permission until finally the government reaches a point where it can't borrow anymore. That's where we are right now.
Okay.
And it's at that point, rather than let the system collapse, they start looking covetously at the wealth of other nations and start thinking about invading and stealing other people's wealth in order to keep this whole debt system going. But in the end, it is a pyramid scheme because of the very nature of private central banking. The debt produced by the bank is always going to exceed the supply of money with which to pay that debt.
It's beyond the pale for me. But I do want to change gears, and I've said I wasn't going to take up much of your time, and I'm going to hold to that.
Well, I'm still guzzling coffee, so we're good to go.
Okay. Hawaii, which is where you make your home.
Yes.
You have 2 issues going on there, and the first one is that Hawaii finds itself in the stream of the radioactive water that's coming out of Fukushima. And how is this, or is this affecting life, the sea life, the plant life, the people's life? What's going on with that? Because we don't get. I follow E&E News, and they're very good about updating what's going on with the West Coast, but there's a void where you're located, and I wanted to get an update right off the ground, if possible.
Well, actually, because of the flow of the North Pacific Gyre Current, most of the radioactive water from Fukushima actually passes us to the north. And the west coast of the Americas is actually getting worse than we are here in Hawaii. That's only temporary because the backflow of that same current is bringing that radioactive water back here, coming from the east rather than the west. The only advantage is, of course, that the shorter-lived isotopes have already died out by the time it gets here. But we started monitoring for radiation when Fukushima first hit. We've had a couple of hot days. There's no question that it is here. Our greatest concern, of course, is the seafood, because fish that become contaminated off the coast of Fukushima are still just as contaminated when they reach San Diego or Honolulu Harbor.
Exactly.
And we need to draw the difference between radioactive exposure and contamination. If you are exposed to a radioactive source briefly, that's not good, but that's the end of it. But if you ingest or inhale a tiny particle of a radioisotope and it buries itself somewhere in your body, you're stuck with it. There's no way to find it or get it out. It's the gift that keeps on giving, and it keeps on irradiating you until you come down with a radiation-induced illness. So people are very, very concerned. But to be very honest, they've thrown up their hands. It is clear at this point, there's not a thing they can do about Fukushima. They have been trying to downplay it and make everybody forget about it ever since. But the levels of radiation coming up from the ground underneath the ruined reactors is growing. There are very short-lived isotopes being detected, meaning that there is uncontrolled spontaneous nuclear fission taking place in the ground underneath Fukushima.
As the fuel rods continue to melt into the earth.
It's a genuine China syndrome. Although in this case, it's in Japan.
Yes. And I mean, and part of the reason I wanted to ask you about that, Michael, is because we're now getting reports that cesium-137 is showing up in citrus in Florida, which is very concerning, and it's directly related to Fukushima. I mean,
and that is one of the short-lived isotopes. So we're not talking about cesium that emerged when Fukushima first melted down. We're talking about cesium being picked up on the wind and carried. I mean, this is a global disaster.
It's a global disaster.
The reality is, if you have the necessary equipment to do it, you can take samples in the air. You can still detect radioisotopes going all the way back to the nuclear tests that were done here in the Pacific, out at Bikini Atoll and the rest of it. That debris, that fallout is still in the air and the water.
Jeez. And it probably will be for hundreds of years because, like you said, it's completely out of control. They have no way of containing it. They have no way of dealing with it. We don't have the technology. When it first happened, I believe it was TEPCO that admitted it's going to take 20 years to develop the technology just to deal with this thing. I mean,
and meanwhile, they're just pouring all this radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly.
And here's the part that is really alarming. Between Fukushima toxifying the North Pacific and eventually the South Pacific, and the Deepwater Horizon disaster toxifying the Gulf of Mexico, it's arguable there isn't enough safe and healthy food to feed the current human population anymore. And the response by corporations and government is going to be, well, feed them the radioactive food. I mean, if they get cancer, we'll make money off of them over at the cancer hospitals.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's disgusting. But on a more positive note that I want to end on, there's been some articles in the news lately about, once again, your home state, about secession. And I wanted to find out what's going on, if you're involved with that, or how that is proceeding, because I know that I believe there's about a dozen states that actually have secession on the floor of their legislation or legislator, but they're not active. And Hawaii is currently very active with seceding from the United States. And can you give us an update on what's happening there?
Well, first of all, the word secession is misleading.
Okay.
Because it implies that Hawaii is actually legally one of the United States. And that is very much in dispute because of irregularities. First of all, how the Hawaii Republic was overthrown with U.S. meddling and intervention, how it was co-opted by the very wealthy plantation owners, and then how it was then annexed, which is not actually legal to do. The same thing applies to Texas. And finally, how the plebiscite vote that made Hawaii a state did not comply with United Nations requirements for a plebiscite vote for a non-self-governing territory. Because under UN rules, people in a non-self-governing territory, when they're offered a plebiscite vote, they're supposed to be given three options. One, to continue as they are, a non-self-governing territory under foreign occupation. Two, to merge with the governing nation, to become a state in the case of Hawaii. Or three, to break free and become a self-governing territory. That third option was not on the plebiscite for the Hawaiian people. When the U.S. government was considering annexation, there was a huge petition drive against annexation, and the petitions were never shown to the U.S. Congress. And back in the Clinton administration, President Bill Clinton signed a public law, and it was Public Law 103-150, which acknowledged the illegality of the United States annexation of Hawaii and acknowledged that the indigenous Hawaiian people never surrendered their sovereignty. And a lot of people have taken that very, very seriously. Now, the U.S. has pulled a fast one because what they're doing is they're granting the indigenous Hawaiian people their sovereignty the same way they grant the Native Americans. They're trying to create a nation within a nation. We're going to give you this worthless piece of land down on Kahulawi, which used to be used as a bombing range by the Navy, and you can have your own government and everything, but we're not giving the rest of Hawaii back to the Hawaiian people, is basically what it comes down to. But the independence movement here in Hawaii is basically trying to get the United Nations to acknowledge the fact that under various treaties in effect and international law, Hawaii's statehood is actually invalid. And Alaska's basically taking the same approach. They're not talking about secession. Secession implies that you're legally a state of the Union. And in both Alaska's case, Hawaii's case, and even now in Texas, the legality of the statehood itself is in dispute.
And I hope that all three of them are successful, because somebody needs to win against these criminals that are in Washington, D.C. that think that they can just run roughshod over everybody, including the people that are here.
This government has run roughshod over everybody on the face of planet Earth at this point. Unfortunately, looking into the future, we're looking at one of two possibilities. One is a collapse of the economy, which will probably take the federal government with it, at which point I would expect the United States as it exists now to start fragmenting, Hawaii becoming a republic again, Alaska becoming its own land, Texas as well. There's talk of the Western States coalition forming their own nation, and then you'd probably have the original Northeast power block become a country, and something roughly approximating the Confederacy would become their own country as well. The other alternative, of course, is we're rushing headlong into a world war, which is probably going to wind up being nuclear. And the reason for that is historical precedent, because every time this government has gotten itself into a huge financial mess, they get into a world war, if not to fix it, at least to distract the American people from it and give the government somebody to scapegoat for all the hardship. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and here we are making war on all these countries all over the planet.
So you think that that's going to be the final outcome?
Well, if I have a choice, I'd rather go with the economic crash, because we're probably going to get that. We're going to get that anyway. We just won't have the mushroom clouds to deal with.
Which I really hope that there aren't any mushroom clouds in our future.
Well,
but,
me too, because I can look out this window here to my left at a first strike primary target down there in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, which is not. That's not good. I mean, I'm very close to Oak Ridge. I'm in Nashville, so I mean that'll go. That's definitely a first strike target as well. Anybody
not wearing 2 million sunblock is going to have a bad day.
Yep, and there you have it. Well, on that cheery note, Michael, I guess I'll let you get back to your afternoon. And once again, I really appreciate all your time, and this has been a great show. I really appreciate it, and I really hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future.
It would be my pleasure.
Well, we've been speaking with Michael Rivero, who is the publisher of WhatReallyHappened.com, and he has a radio show Monday through Fridays on the GCN network, and people can just come to the website and listen and watch the show. Is that right?
That's right. During the broadcast, there's a BAM user video feed, and there is a link that goes to the GCN streaming page, and there's all kinds of different ways to listen to it. There are podcasts. There's a gentleman who archives all of my shows out there on YouTube, and we're in a very dangerous time right now, where the money junkies really are willing to see billions of human beings die just in exchange for a financial advantage and a little bit of money. We need to recognize that there really is a problem with money addiction.
Yes.
Now, when we look at alcohol addiction or methamphetamine addiction or heroin addiction, we recognize it's a disease. But for some reason, we don't seem to understand money addiction is just as destructive of society and far more dangerous. And we need to recognize that now.
Actually, it's more dangerous and far more destructive. I mean, I've come to the conclusion that the worst of the crimes against humanity are the financial ones, because when you start wrecking entire nations and stripping them of their sovereignty, which is what happened when the Federal Reserve was born, that is truly a crime against humanity, period. And you can't, and it's very deceptive in the way that it works. So that's my take on it. But
well, I'm sorry to have talked past the ending of your program here, and
oh, you're good.
Again,
there is no ending.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you very much, Michael. Have a good afternoon.
Same to you. Aloha.
Bye-bye.